I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a swath of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Today, we had said, Tom, on our last podcast, we said that we were going to do a post-rock genre deep dive
We sure
next.
did.
Are we?
No.
No, we're not going to do that. Something happened.
It was like 3 days after we recorded.
If you go to www.radiohead.com/deadairspace, you're going to see a pretty picture, and it says something happened. And because of that post, we have to delay our post-rock genre deep dive. We absolutely have to. And instead, in its place, it is finally time to do the Radiohead deep dive.
It is. It's probably going to be years before we get another thing from them. I hope I'm wrong.
It's probably going to be probably like 2020, 2021 at least before we get to do this again.
They release a statement that they're doing a collaborative album with Tool, and then it'll never happen.
Yeah. No, it will never happen then. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episodes sent to your device each week. Also, Velocities in Music does not want your money. We also don't want to introduce ads into this podcast just yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with family or friends whom you think would benefit in joining in on the music discussion Tom and I attempt to create every week. Mm-hmm. All right, so how do you even start talking about a band like Radiohead? We did a few months ago, it was like January, we did a deep dive into the Beatles. And it was the first time in Velocities in Music context, Tom, that we had ever dove into the Beatles. That's not true for Radiohead.
Yeah.
And, you know, in 2011, we were, young lads. Mm-hmm. We'd been doing video album reviews for about a year at that point. We still weren't good at it. We sucked. Yeah. I've gone back and watched some of those, and man, I wish I could not have recorded those and posted those on the internet so I could never run for public office. But The King of Limbs came out in 2011, and we reviewed that. And then I think we've done Kid A.
We did Kid A. Kid A was one of our first 50 reviews, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, so we did Kid A first.
Yes.
And then later on we did In Rainbows and then The King of Limbs when it came out.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's all we've reviewed. So if you're diehard Velocities in Music followers, and there are, believe it or not, a few of you out there, you've probably watched those reviews. So there's two things that I want to say really quick to those of you who have experienced those reviews. One, I'm sorry for the low quality of the content, and hopefully we do better this time around. And two, I am also sorry if there is anything duplicative between the content that you're going to hear in this podcast, because what we'd like to do is just start off in 1985 when Radiohead were attending school. The members of Radiohead were attending school together, and then started forming their band, and then we'll walk through their discography. Yeah. So without further ado, I think we should just jump in.
Let's do it.
By the way,
I do have further ado.
Okay.
I just want to point out, if I sound like absolute crap to people, it's because I've been sick this week, so I've got my full baritone going on here. So I apologize if I'm sounding particularly froggy. That's just how it is.
Also,
yeah.
Have you seen any good concerts lately?
Oh my God, dude. Okay, so good story to tell right here. So this week, not only was I sick, but last night, Jake and I, this is Thursday, May 19th that we're recording this. Last night, Wednesday, May 18th, in Des Moines, Baroness was playing. And about a half mile west of Baroness, Paul Simon was playing. So me and Jake, my brother and my wife, we go out to dinner. Jake and my brother go to Baroness. Me and my wife go to Paul Simon, leave a little bit early, go to Baroness. Only caught the last 4 songs, but it was a pretty hardcore evening.
And I gotta say, Baroness live, definitely exceeded expectations. They were incredible.
It was wild.
It was incredible.
Probably contributed to my throatiness though, because
I'm sure it does.
Well, I didn't scream along. That I did. The one song I sang along to last night was "Take My Bones Away," which is the last track that Baroness played. And yeah. Now everyone at work, Jake, today was telling me that I should record a Johnny Cash cover.
You probably could right now.
Burns, burns, burns.
That's nice.
The ring of fire.
That's really
there you
nice.
go. Yeah, it's the best I got.
Now, I didn't know you were sick because I haven't talked to you all week. But
yeah, true.
I didn't know you were sick, so I just figured that the deep baritone was from you screaming at a Paul Simon concert.
This is because I'm like getting over a cold.
Well, I just have this image of you just screaming when no one else is at a Paul Simon concert.
Me and Julio down by the schoolyard.
I assume was like a.
Yeah, I'm just like
I assume everyone
that.
was sitting down at this concert.
Yeah,
it wasn't a
pretty much.
stand-up, like lively crowd. It was more of a, I'm going to
it was,
push my glasses up and sip my wine and watch Paul Simon and his band perform.
It was the most middle-class, middle-aged white audience you could possibly imagine.
And then you went from that to Baroness.
I sure did.
Oh,
it was
rough.
great.
That's rough. Sounds like a rough night.
No, it was awesome.
All right, so Radiohead. That's what we're actually going to talk about.
What are we here for? Okay, Radiohead.
Okay, so just general disclaimer. We do this at the beginning of usually for every one of our artist deep dives. We are not super fans. Actually, that's not really true. Radiohead is my favorite band. I'm just going to come out and say it. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
I have this insane love for Radiohead that as I talk through some of these albums, as Tom and I talk through some of these albums, it's going to be very clear that I am just biased towards everything Radiohead, that I think that they're the greatest band of our generation and all of that. So that's going to come out. That being said, I am not the craziest fan out there.
Yeah.
There are many of you, I'm sure, that are listening to this, probably, if you're listening to random independent music review podcasts, you're probably going to also have the same aptitude to make you an expert at certain bands like Radiohead. So I'm sure that there's some of you out there who absolutely know more about Radiohead than either Tom and I combined.
Sure. Well, and also Radiohead is just a band that people get passionate and rabid about, and I love that about them. But also, by nature of what we do, Jake, I think that you and I are of the mindset that really there are no sacred cows in music, Everything is subject to the same level of criticism as anything else, and just as much as I ripped apart some beloved Beatles tracks. If you recall me saying I thought "Come Together" from Abbey Road was kind of a boring track.
I still think there's something wrong with you.
I guarantee you I'm gonna say some equally sacrilegious things about Radiohead. Doesn't mean I don't love them. Most of them are going to
be in rainbows.
Yeah,
some
some of them, but I'll try to surprise you.
All right. All right. So, historical perspective. I'm going to just purposefully kind of glaze over some of the gloss over, but it will be like after you apply many layers of gloss, one could say it's a glaze.
There you go.
I'm going to gloss over some of their early history, but from a few key points. So these guys formed in 1985. They were originally called On a Friday. Mm-hmm. Who are Radiohead? They are Tom York, who's a guitarist and ends up being the lead singer, bassist Colin Greenwood. Those two were in the same class. And then the year above them, guitarist Ed O'Brien, drummer Phil Selway, and then 2 years below Tom and Colin is Colin's little brother, Jonny Greenwood. Mm-hmm. So they form a band, and yes, I'm leaving out some details. They start jamming at their school, which is called Abingdon School, and then eventually, they move on and start doing other things. They're still staying together as a band. They're playing a lot of local shows, and then they're actually from their shows, and it sounds like they played a lot of clubs in that area. And we're starting to garner some record company attention, record label attention. And eventually they end up signing with Parlophone. That Parlophone asked them to change their name from On a Friday to Radiohead, which is a great name stemming from a
Talking Head song.
Mm-hmm. And still to this day, I think it's just one of the best band names I've ever heard.
It is a great band name.
So they start their first real recording process of a bunch of songs, like most bands do when they've been playing a few years. They start recording, and I think it was like 1991, 1992, they start recording their first record. Mm-hmm. So at this point, they had been playing music together for 5 to 7 years. Mm-hmm. And something I want to put in perspective, we've already started making comparisons to the Beatles, just in the fact that there's going to be so much content here that it reminds us of our Beatles deep dive.
Right.
Something that hit me when I was driving over to your house, Tom.
Sure. 1985,
these guys formed. 20 years before that was 1965, obviously. Yeah. The Beatles were just getting started 20 years before the start of Radiohead. So like the Beatles were in that same spot, starting to meet up, play instruments, form the band, just a little over 20 years prior to when Radiohead started doing that.
Sure.
Think about this. It's 2016 now. 31 years have passed since they started forming. A decade longer has passed in between the Beatles forming and Radiohead forming than now and when Radiohead formed.
Yeah.
That is mind-blowing. That is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And I have to point out some similarities between the two. They met at school, various age groups. They
have the quiet younger lead guitarist.
Exactly.
That's pretty specific,
in Jonny Greenwood. So just a couple similarities there. Not that this just automatically paves the path for greatness, but it's just kind of curious that there are similarities between how the Beatles formed and how Radiohead forms. So, anyways, they start their recording process on the Parlophone label. In 1992, they released the Drill EP.
Yeah.
Which had several of the songs that would inevitably end up on their first album, Pablo Honey, which was released in 1993. Now, Pablo Honey, to just dive right into this album.
All right.
Obviously, Pablo Honey, the second track on the album, is Creep.
Yes.
And Creep,
big single.
Creep is the big single. Creep plays a big role in Radiohead's history because it is the single that really got them popular and launched them into international success. Not immediately, but progressively over their first formative years.
Yeah, it was not an overnight success thing. It was a slow burn for them. In the beginning, they had a lot of tracks, and it's one of those things where in hindsight, it's easier for us to see how music history played out and say, well, yeah, Creep, of course, it was the hit single from Pablo Honey, launched them to stardom, and blah, blah, blah. But really, at the time, all you are is a fledgling band who's trying to identify which of your songs will make the strongest single. And it's actually kind of funny in hindsight that they picked Creep because it wasn't overly well received at first. In fact, a BBC station refused to play it on the grounds that it was too depressing. A lot of people didn't like it, thought it was kind of, turned them off to their sound, thought they were trying to be like a grunge band like Nirvana or something.
And they also, in the same sentence almost, get criticized for being Nirvana light. Not grunge enough to be like Nirvana, but also too depressing. So they were kind of just in this
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Absolutely. And a funny story about what makes Creep so special is in the pre-chorus when Jonny does that guitar crunch. And he did that, I think, because he was just pissed off on a live performance once. I think that he just kind of accidentally did that.
And it's the signature of the song.
And it's the signature of the song. It's what makes that song so angsty.
It's what grabs your attention. You're listening through, and it's just kind of this droll melody and so on. I mean, it's good, it's well performed, but then it gets to that, and you're like, "Holy shit! Okay, these guys are for real." Like that. That's the part that hooks me every time. So I love when you have these just kind of odd stories, birthed from completely left field thoughts, but I love how that song turned out. But contributing to the rest of the album there, of course, Creep is a single, as we mentioned, it started to garner international attention. It was being played in America a bit a little while later. But really, Pablo Honey as an album didn't do overwhelmingly well in Britain. It did well enough to keep the attention of fans and to keep the label's attention and so on. But the music itself, a lot of people I hear come back to Pablo Honey, and I hear a lot of mixed things about that. Some people just say it's garbage. Some people try to defend it, saying, this is actually a pretty solid rock record. And it's really hard to know who's saying it about Pablo Honey for Pablo Honey and who's saying it through the rose-colored glasses of Radiohead's future work. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Or just absolute band bias.
Right, exactly. Some honestly, I got to say, if that was their only record, would people really come back to it all that much?
No.
I don't think so. No. Now, it's still an enjoyable album. It's still a good little rock album, but the Radiohead label on it and what that has become is to me what makes it a more talked about record. I mean, obviously, it's the reason we're talking about it on this podcast. Yep. So,
in your mind, Tom,
yeah.
how would you describe the general sound of Pablo Honey. Obviously, it's rock, and it's 1993, so grunge had become a big thing at this point. Grunge, in our grunge genre deep dive a month or two ago, we talked about how, grunge hit the scene so fast and then spread so rapidly outside of bands from Seattle.
Yeah.
You had all these poser bands coming in and making, starting to make grunge music. And, Radiohead was honestly one of those bands.
Sure.
And I think Pablo Honey, you hear some of that grunge influence that these guys, wanted to make a grungy rock record. But it's not all grunge.
No. And here's what I think. I think that the production facilitates that grunge sound more than the songwriting does. Because keep in mind, too, a lot of these tracks, they'd been playing for years. And really what their bigger influences were bands like REM and the Smiths. And you could totally picture some of these songs from Pablo Honey being produced in a more 80s alternative rock, REM, the Smiths kind of style, and it would just be presented differently. Instead, it was presented with more of a grunge format, but really I don't think that's necessarily how the songwriting is. Some of the time it certainly is, but I gotta say, while this album isn't overly strong to me, it does have its virtues, one of which I think is the opening track, You. Comes in with this kind of odd time signature thing. They drop a beat where it's got this kind of 6-6-6-5 pattern, which I really dig. They're starting their discography with a little bit of kind of a math rock edge. A little bit progressive. And then there's the acoustic ballad, Thinking About You, which I think is a pretty good track.
Yeah, track 5.
Yeah, there are some other good tracks on here as well, which we can get to, but I do feel like it's very inconsistent in quality. The big thing that stands out to me, though, is detracting from this, is Tom York had just not matured yet. And I think that his performance comes off as a little angsty and a little whiny and immature. And the lyrics don't really speak to me at all on this record. Given that, though, I think the instrumental performances are pretty solid. Jonny Greenwood is already doing some cool stuff on the guitar. He knows how to work with Ed O'Brien and Tom on the guitars, that 3-guitar attack. I think that they had that pretty well figured out from the beginning. I just don't think that the way Tom overlays the vocals on the sound really strengthens it consistently throughout the record.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a couple other tracks I think that are worth mentioning. On the front half of the record, you have track 4, Stop Whispering, which kind of builds an intensity throughout. And then one of the singles, another one of the singles was Anyone Can Play Guitar, which was track 6. Sure. And I think Anyone Can Play Guitar is an interesting song. It was actually recorded and put out before, in advance of the record, so but it didn't have much commercial success. And he has the line, "I wanna be me."
Jim Morrison.
Grow my hair. I wanna be Jim Morrison. To your point, Tom, about the lyrics not speaking to you, how can they? I mean, like, it just kind of seems a bit juvenile. Obviously, even that song is about, wanting to be something that you're not. And throughout this record, you do have themes, lyrical themes around self-loathing, around just trying to find one's place in society and life and things like that. But it's all very superficial.
Yeah.
And some of the songwriting is a little superficial too at times. You have a lot of, just generic rock and pop structures of verse, chorus with a bridge in there. And several of the tracks just don't really add anything to the album listening experience. There are a few tracks on this record that have I would say hints of greatness, right? Like, you hear them doing some really cool things, especially in the guitars. And I think that where you hear the hints of greatness, and I would say that honestly, as far as Tom's vocals go, you hear hints of greatness in his vocals as well. And if you've listened to The U.S. edition of Pablo Honey has a bonus track of Creep acoustic. If you listen to that, I mean, like, you can hear Tom York's vocals. He clearly has a strong vocal presence. He clearly has a great voice, and you can tell that, like, in hindsight, that he's going places, right? But one song I really want to add attention to is the last track on the album, which is Blowout. Blowout is one of the longer tracks on the album, and it is just, I think, a very underrated, if not the most underrated Radiohead song. It is just this kind of shoegazy guitar explosion towards the end of the track, and it's just this wall of sound, and you hear Jonny just go off on guitar. I think it's really indicative of where Radiohead is going to go with their sound. Even on their next record, The Bends, you don't hear dynamic shifts that intense, except for maybe on a couple tracks. And you really don't hear the same guitar intonation until you get to OK Computer, their third album, which came out, several years later. You do hear, aspects of their sound, aspects of their songwriting, aspects of just their music that they're trying to create that lead to greatness.
Yeah. But what's odd is those moments are paired with so many crap moments moments. Like, How Do You?
Yep.
Not a worthy song. I'm not a big fan of Lurgy, if that's how you pronounce it.
Or Vegetable.
Vegetable I'm not big on. Also Prove Yourself. I'm not big on that song either.
I like I Can't.
I do too. That's the highlight until you get to Blowout. That's the highlight of the back half for me.
I would agree with that. So after the release of Pablo Honey in 1993, Creep kind of spreads around the world. It kind of creeps. It's kind of creep.
Oh.
Yeah, it creeps around. A few radio stations on the west coast of the United States start picking it up. It starts getting, they recorded a music video for Creep, and it starts getting heavy rotation on MTV. Back when MTV actually did something worthwhile and played, music videos. So Creep was becoming very popular in multiple countries, multiple continents around the world. And so Radiohead and their record label has them go on this extensive tour, and they're essentially playing these songs, these handful of songs that they've been playing since. Keep in mind, they started writing these in 1985. They've been playing the same material this whole time. And they're playing them on just a ridiculous touring schedule all the time, just playing Creep over and over and over again. And they literally do this for a long time, like something like 150 plus concerts in 1993.
Jeez.
Just a crazy amount of time. So they started to work on their second record in 1994. Their second record eventually being The Bends. It's important to talk about how they go into the studio here, because they are burned out at this point. They've just been playing these same songs, hanging out with each other for so long. And let's face it, these guys are a bunch of moody, angsty young men at this point. That's just kind of a recipe for disaster. So they get in the studio, doesn't really go well, doesn't really click. And I don't know the exact timing of this, but at some point in time, they start working with Nigel Godrich.
He was actually he was an engineer underneath the producer. For the Bends, who was John Leckie, the famed Abbey Road studio producer.
So they start doing this recording, and they're under this tremendous amount of pressure to make the next Creep. So how do they do that? They write the song My Iron Lung,
right?
Which directly, like, lyrically attacks.
It's a rejection of the success they got from the one song, Creep.
Which I have to give Radiohead credit for doing, because that's the ultimate grunge move.
That's true.
Like, that's
true.
exactly what any good grunge artist that's worth their salt would do. They would rebel against the sound that made them famous.
Basically, In Utero.
Yeah, it's exactly what Nirvana did.
Yeah.
So they did that. They released the My Iron Lung EP in 1994, finished the album, and then released The Bends in 1995. So let's talk about The Bends, Tom.
Sure.
Do you like The Bends?
Oh, I freaking love The Bends.
Who doesn't like The Bends?
Dude, it's a hard album not to like.
Why is that?
I feel like they took all the good things about Pablo Honey and perfected all of the bad things about it. Another thing I want to point out too is in late 1994 they released the My Iron Lung EP, which had My Iron Lung on it, but then also several songs that would not appear on the bends. Now, this is something that we're going to see throughout Radiohead's discography, and this is something we talked about in our Beatles deep dive. It's also something we talked about in our Smiths deep dive. And I'm just finding this trend that great bands have a tendency to release B-sides and non-album singles between albums as a way to experiment outside of an album context. And when you listen to the My Iron Lung EP, it's got some B-sides on there, songs like Lewis Mistreated and so on, that really have a very different sound from Pablo Honey, but really they don't make any sense together. So it feels like Radiohead getting that out of their system, and then for the bends, they have the more polished songs that work better together as an album. And to me, this album is just one of the best straightforward, just no gimmick rock albums that I've ever heard. They haven't really started fully experimenting yet, but what they have done is they're just trying to do as much as they can with the guitar, bass, drums, vocals approach that they know how to do. And I think that they just kill it in the songwriting department on this album.
I think one of the primary changes that you hear on the bends is the tri-guitar attack.
Yeah.
Most of these songs on this record, you hear three guitars. Usually Tom playing acoustic guitar, and then Ed playing more of an effects-based electric guitar, and Jonny just doing everything, whether that's insane rhythm guitar, riffs, or just playing, lead solos, that sort of thing. On almost every track, you hear just this guitar onslaught. Yet they still have a ton of dynamics on this record.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that sticks out to me as well, as I mentioned, my biggest complaint about Pablo Honey is Tom's vocals. He just fixed it. I mean, to me, it's as simple as that. He just took everything bad about his vocals on Pablo Honey, the annoying lyrics, the kind of whiny juvenile tendencies in the presentation, and he just smooths it out. It just works. Like, I just think something clicked with him that made that work, and his vocals now are complementing the instrumentals in all of their glory, and it just comes together perfectly.
I think one of the things that makes the Bends such a great record is that literally every single track on this album is strong.
Oh, yeah.
And while I do have favorites, and I do think that there are a couple of tracks that maybe one could argue aren't quite at the same level as everything else, they're still great.
I'd agree with that, so I'd be interested to see which of those songs are for you.
Absolutely. So starting off, this album opens up with Planet Telex. And keep in mind, this is Radiohead. Every single one of these songs has their own little independent story.
Yeah.
That if you're a real Radiohead fan, you're just going to get a ton of enjoyment out of going and researching that and finding that. And just for the purposes of this podcast, while I'd love to sit and talk about all those stories, and inevitably we'll touch on a couple of them, we just can't fit them all in. I know that there's a story with Planet Telex.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into it. Anyways, that song kicks off, and you hear, you just immediately sense that Radiohead are doing something different on this record. The production is at a whole new level, probably by having such a legendary producer and their future sixth member of the band, Nigel Godrich, working on this record. You just hear the production playing so much bigger of a role right from the get-go with just the first lines of Planet Telex, and then as the song comes in, you hear there's the kind of distorted yet very melodic guitar lines come in, and then Tom's beautiful voice coming in over top of it. As the album progresses, you then have the title track with the Bends, which is a bit more of an intense, still very upbeat rocker, and then they pull it back on track 3 with their first single from this record, or one of their first singles from the record. I actually don't know the order that they released the singles, but High and Dry.
Yeah.
Which was recorded much before the rest of this record was recorded. High and Dry is this very simple sounding song that is incredibly well written.
Yeah.
Just from a craft based perspective, just in how all the instruments play off of one another, work together, how they work with Tom's vocals and lyrical parts. The whole assemblance is just really well thought out.
And then it goes into Fake Plastic Trees, which I've always been a little bit curious actually to this, because I feel like they took High and Dry and Fake Plastic Trees, which are two kind of like ballad-esque songs, and they put them right next to each other, just a few tracks into the album. But really it helps the way that the album flows, because Fake Plastic Trees, while it starts kind of soft, it is one big crescendo of a track. Yep. And by the end of it, it's not only louder in the dynamics, but it's louder in its emotional impact as well. Right. It just feels so huge. It's a song that you really feel. And then I feel like that works really well going right into Bones, which Bones is one of the tracks for me, Jake, that I don't feel like is a particularly standout track on its own. But the spot that it is in on the album serves the album so well as that bridge between Fake Plastic Trees and Nice Dream, because Nice Dream is another, kind of dreamy track. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit softer.
More acoustic guitar based.
Right. And if it was High and Dry, Fake Plastic Trees, and then Nice Dream, it simply wouldn't have worked. They needed another rock track in the middle of that.
After Nice Dream, you have the point in the album, really the second part of this record starts, because the second half is much more dynamically intense. Starting off with track 7, then moving on to the track we talked about before, My Iron Lung. Then they pull the whole album back, and with this beautiful guitar ballad called Bulletproof, I Wish I Was. Mm-hmm. And then to close the album out, 3 really strong tracks, Black Star, which is another one of just quintessential Ben's tracks. Mm-hmm. That's just this tri-guitar attack with just these sparkling electric guitar parts, and some of Tom's best lyrics and vocal presentation. Sulk is speaking of vocal presentation, is some of Tom York's best vocals on any of his albums, and he's actually gone and said that he felt that his vocals on Sulk were too pretty. Now, personally, I think Sulk as a song is not one of the stronger tracks on this record. That and Bone. So if those were your two,
yeah, they actually were.
Me too.
All right, we're there.
And the thing is, though, is that I still think that they're great tracks. I never want to skip those tracks.
You never skip them
because they fit so well.
And
they
serve the album exactly. Yeah. If they serve the album, they don't have to be perfect to make the album perfect. And I feel like that's what they do here. But then we get to the closer, Street Spirit, Fade Out, which this song is just absolutely incredible.
Why?
It's so we see Radiohead in a kind of state and mood that anticipates what they will do in the future, but they hadn't really done yet. And the fact that they put this at the end of the album is amazing, because this song is ghostly. You have this very clean, kind of arpeggiated guitar part, and when Tom comes in with the vocals, he's crooning in such a way that it just flows. On the rest of the bends, you get Tom singing in his more kind of rock mindset. Things are a little more chopped up. He's really trying to put some flair and performance behind it. In Street Spirit, he's really he's smooth. He is the ghost of the studio that is singing this track. And it's got this surreal quality that is unlike anything they'd done.
Another thing that we see really evolve in Radiohead's sound on the bends is Tom York really comes into his own as a lyricist. Tom, you were just speaking about Street Spirit, Fade Out, and this song, I've always loved the lyrics to this song, and he's definitely, the thing about Tom York's lyrics is that they're never very specific. They're always very abstract, almost like you're reading just abstract poetry. If you read them on a page, and here he just the lyrical themes are just as foreboding, just as foreshadowing as the music is. And the last line of this song, which is after Fade Out again, and you have these huge choruses and that aren't huge from an instrumental perspective, because that's the thing about Street Spirit, Fade Out that just amazes me, is without adding a ton of instrumentation and strings and production, they make this huge intensity build.
Yeah.
But they really haven't changed all that much. It's done mostly through Tom's voice.
Yeah. They bring in other layers of it, they reverb it out,
yep,
and it just works.
And then at the very end of it, he belts out "Immerse Your Soul in Love," which is an incredibly, it's a very short statement. Immerse your soul in love, but think about how impactful that is as you hear it in the context of Street Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the bends, you hear a number of just very great lyrics. Some of these songs, we glossed over Just. How do you gloss over Just?
Right.
Just is this incredible rock track where at this point, Jonny Greenwood is experimenting with, he's trying to just find any new chord he can get his hands on and try to work them into a song. He is really pushing his craft as a guitarist. And you hear that on songs like Just, where Jonny is he's trying, there's one point in the song in the solo of Just where he is trying to play the highest note possible to be played. Yep. And he does that high-pitched squeal, he's pushing it through a fuzz box, everything just sounds so distorted and disgustingly beautiful and dirty, that it just conveys such an attitude.
Yeah. That song grinds perfectly. Like, to the point where it's controlled chaos to a degree that, as you mentioned, Jake, it still sounds beautiful somehow, even when it's just grating against your ears.
So, there's a number of these tracks on this record that are just my favorite tracks. Some of my favorite Radiohead tracks. In fact, my favorite Radiohead song is on this track, on this album.
Really?
Yes.
Is it Fake Plastic Trees?
It is Fake Plastic
All
Trees.
Right.
Fake Plastic Trees being starts off as an acoustic ballad that just slowly builds throughout. It's actually probably one of the most simple songs on this record.
Yeah.
Just in its natural structure and format. But Tom's voice, his lyrics, the way that the guitars build, and the chord progression, I just find to be absolutely stunning. And still to this day, whenever I listen to this song, I get chills just because it's so good, and that's why it will always be my favorite Radiohead song.
And at this point, I mentioned that this album is still kind of a straight rock album, right? That's not to say they're not doing some experimentation. We see that at the very beginning of the first track, right? But what they're evolving, what they're developing is their sense for sound and knowing exactly what sound and what effect a song or a part needs at any given time. And that's also there at the beginning of My Iron Lung, which is one of my favorite tracks on this album. Yeah. I think that arguably has one of the best guitar riffs of all time.
Yeah.
And it starts out and it's this guitar riff that's got this harmonized guitar effect on it that gives it this kind of weird, almost Eastern sound to it. And if you imagine that guitar track, that guitar part just being played straight with straight distortion, doesn't have nearly the same impact. They were already knowing, in conjunction with the producers they're working with, of course, as well, knowing exactly what sound needs to be there and how to convey a sonic idea properly. Because that's an important part of the recording and the writing process that I think a lot of people don't think of. You could have a terrific song, and if you record it and perform it in a way that doesn't serve the song, it will not be conveyed to people as a great song. Right. And what Radiohead has always had, always since the Bends, I would argue, not as much beforehand, but then again, it's just kind of simple rock tracks. You don't necessarily need that. But where they go with a more adventurous kind of sonic approach is they have the tact of knowing exactly how to present a sound, and we're going to see that even more with their next few albums.
A couple more things to just kind of build off of what you were just saying to wrap up the Bends. The last thing I want to point out is just their expansion as songwriters and just the subtle things that Radiohead do as they craft these songs. And I think that one of the things that makes Radiohead special, and I'm really going to get into this in their later records, is just that they know exactly how to do these little adjustments in the song to add these subtleties that make the song so much more meaningful, so much more impactful and dynamic. One example I'd put out is in High and Dry. So one of their earlier songs, this song was recorded, just right after Pablo Honey came out. In High and Dry, which is a soft song with a couple of nice choruses, just not one of their loudest songs on the record, but they still do a breakdown and they bring it down to be very, very quiet. It's really just Tom singing and just like Phil's doing the little kick drum thing. But then he does this drum fill, and that brings back that just like do that beat that just defines what High and Dry is all about. That beat that you have from the beginning of the song. The song starts with Phil Selway's drum beat, and you have the same beat throughout the entire song until this breakdown that adds this dynamic intensity, and then he just does this perfect little simple fill, get it? To bring that drum beat back in. Just a beautiful songwriting device. Just shows their craft.
And
Another one.
It doesn't add much runtime to the song.
Oh no,
it's like 10 seconds.
No,
or something.
It adds a huge amount of
absolutely
diversity and intensity to the song. Another example is in Black Star. Black Star is you have these just sprawling guitar parts, very melodic, echoing guitar parts, and then Tom's in his falsetto. He's singing, really pretty things. There's 3 verses to this song, and in the third verse, Tom goes, and usually it's just a single. And to me, I'm sure there's multiple tracks here. Tom is, but to me, I hear just one Tom York voice. But in the third verse. Tom goes, I keep falling over, I keep passing out every time I see a face.
I knew you were going to go, when you brought up Black Star, I knew you were going to bring this up, and you're right on.
And Tom sings it, but they double tracked it with with him harmonizing his own vocal part, and holy crap, it just changes the whole intensity of the song. Your attention is immediately brought right to the vocals, and they shift your listening experience to be something completely different by one very subtle technique.
And another thing they do too, though, is they remove the guitar from that verse.
Yes, that's a good point.
So it's just bared down to the drums and the bass, and when Tom's not singing, Colin on the bass brings in this cool little like groovy kind of bass fill. And as you said, what a great way to make that work, because bands too often and I'm going to call out Oasis on this one. Oasis does this all the time. They'll have these like 5.5 minute long tracks with 3 verses where the third verse is just the same damn thing as the first verse, and they don't try to do anything different with it. And this is coming from an Oasis fan, guys. I'm an Oasis fan, but as I said, nothing's sacred here. We got to call people out on these things. What Radiohead does is such a simple thing. They remove one part and they bring in something a little different. But the songwriting, the chords, the melody is still basically the same. But just that little adjustment adds so much, and they're just becoming masters of that as early as the mid '90s here.
I keep falling over, I keep passing out when I see a face like you. But I'm a
So you see their songwriting evolving, you see Tom York, his vocals and his lyrics evolving, and you see their aptitude for producing interesting and detailed sounding records. You see all these different facets grow on the Bends.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, the Bends as an album is just absolutely brilliant. I don't like, if we were still rating albums, Tom, how could you rate this under 100? You couldn't.
It's a 100 for me.
So in my head, this is, these songs, while they all play off of one another for sure, and Radiohead, they clearly designed the playlist of the Bends to have some flow to it, putting some of the softer songs. There's no it's not an accident that Bulletproof, I Wish I Was, came right after the combination of Justin and My Iron Lung. Similarly, it's no accident that High and Dry and Fake Plastic Trees were put right next to each other.
Yeah.
They did this on purpose. Yet at the same time, each song very much so operates independently of all the other songs. So this is a compilation album, but it's a compilation where a lot of thought was put into the ordering of the tracks, and every track on the album is great. So naturally, you have the recipe for an absolutely brilliant record.
I agree.
So after the Bends was released, of course, Radiohead goes on tour. They actually go on tour opening for REM. And what's funny is Michael Stipe, the main brain of REM, he publicly announces his love for Radiohead. And how could you not? He's listened to the Bends. He's heard him play it live,
Yeah.
right? Of course he loves Radiohead. But it kind of, REM was one of Radiohead's biggest influences. So that pairing, it just seems really fortuitous to me.
does.
So they go on this extensive tour. Radiohead starts showing up on a lot of music critics lists as just like one of the best bands of the time and everything. They're getting a lot of critical acclaim, but not overwhelmingly so. Not like they're the best band in the world acclaim, but still they're getting a lot of notoriety. So with that, they start doing a little bit of recording here and there. They actually record the first song that appears on their 1997 third album, OK Computer. They start recording Lucky to show up on this compilation called the Help album. So they actually record Lucky in 1995, and then later on they record another song that's going to be in the OK Computer area called Talk Show Host.
Yeah.
They
Very
eventually,
different track.
Yeah, and then they eventually record Exit Music for a Film, which is a song that's track 4 on OK Computer, but they recorded it for the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack that came out that year. So they're starting to do all these like fans are getting these songs ahead of time. I'm telling you this not because I want to just like chronologically go through Radiohead's releases, but it becomes important when you hear that Radiohead is recording and playing live songs in advance, that songs that show up on an album in advance of them showing up on the album. It's very critical because, as Tom said earlier,
Does that happen again later?
it may happen again. So as Tom said earlier, a common thing that we've noticed as we do these artist deep dives is like a lot of great artists do this. They find ways of getting music out, almost soliciting feedback on their music ahead of actually putting a whole album together with it, which I find to be a really interesting thing. Clearly, Radiohead is doing that here. So they hop in starting in 1996. The band is now at this point touring with Alanis Morissette, still doing a ton of touring. They actually start recording in earnest at a mansion in Bath, and I believe it was like Jane Seymour's mansion. Which I think is really cool, but they're in earnest recording the songs that will eventually become OK Computer. In June 1997, Radiohead released OK Computer, to massive critical acclaim.
Which they really did not anticipate.
They didn't.
Which, how can you? Once again, you're just a band going into a studio trying to make a good album. You don't know how people are going to react to it, but the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. And it's just these subtle changes that they made to the sound in certain places. But, there are some songs on here that harken back to more of the Bends kind of straightforward rock stuff. And then there are some tracks that just are over the top, like experimental, but they work really well on this album together somehow. And a lot of that, I think, the glue holding it together is Nigel Godrich's production.
Yep.
He knew exactly how to portray the sounds, once again, so that when you have this kind of spooky, like fake organ sound of a song like Exit Music for a Film, which builds into this big, like fuzz bass climax, then all of a sudden it drops into a more kind of vanilla rock track like Let Down. It still somehow works.
Yeah.
That's the magic of albums like this.
And I think that the big shift in sound between the Bends and OK Computer is mostly identifiable in the mood of the record.
Yes.
The Bends is very positive, uplifting, and not uplifting in kind of like a pop sort of way, but just, the songs were very personal. Tom's lyrics were about personal subject matters. OK Computer is about, it's commenting on the busyness of modern society, of the daily grind that most people go through, of getting up and going to work every day and then coming home. It has this loathing, sense of loathing to it, just biting sarcasm, and just very gritty lyrics throughout. Plus, the general mood of the album is exceptionally darker. The guitars are much more atmospheric on this record. You don't get the huge 3-guitar attack like you did on the Bends. Instead, you have a lot more of effects guitar. Tom plays piano a lot more. The general chord structures of most of these songs shift to the minor key.
Yep. And I think that incorporating those new instruments was a big thing because on the Bends, they were still really a guitar rock band.
Absolutely.
And
like you said, it was just an evolved form
Right.
of Pablo Honey, perfected form.
Here's where they start experimenting. You have the track Fitter Happier, which is just a strange kind of, computerized voice experiment with a lot of kind of scary
I used to have it
found
memorized.
sounds in it. Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Actually, I have most of it on a poster back there.
That's why I had it memorized. I had that same poster.
Oh, yeah, that same poster. Well, there you go. That explains it. I've got a lot of Radiohead posters in this room, guys. You got to understand. You can't see them, but they're here. They're watching us. So, except for that one where they have their eyes closed. So sorry. You can tell now that they're starting to become more comfortable with the fact that they are one cohesive band rather than 5 individuals struggling to find something to do on every song. That is something that will become more prevalent on future records, but it's worth noting here because it is present. And it's funny because piano becomes such a key instrument for them later on, but really you didn't hear much of it at all on Pablo Honey or the Bends, and if you did, it was little accents here and there, and guitar was still taking the limelight. But here, you got on OK Computer, you've got Karma Police, which is one of the biggest singles from the album, and that song is mainly piano driven. But they're still able to make this work. They're still able to blend it. You got Electioneering, which very well highlights the cowbell, as many have pointed out.
A lot of people point out on Electioneering. All right, I gotta say, if we're gonna talk about Electioneering, I gotta get on a soapbox.
All right, let's do it.
I think Electioneering is an extremely underrated song.
I agree, man. It's
Not
one of
a
my
lot
favorites
people,
on here.
Me too. A lot of people talk smack about Electioneering. They actually don't like it, and it just bothers me because yes, they used a little cowbell on Electioneering. It's not overwhelming, and I actually think it adds to the song. Moreover, if you're listening to the cowbell, somehow you're missing the most intense guitar on the entire record, more so than the highlight track Paranoid Android, which, just a brief overview of Paranoid Android, it's just one of the best Radiohead tracks of all time. Tom York had this idea, took borrowed from the Beatles. Happiness is a Warm Gun, took 3 different songs, mashed them into one. We'll get into that in a second, but very, very much a guitar driven rock song, rock, almost like epic prog rock song. But Electioneering is just straight out, I'm going to redefine how to play guitar, and it's Jonny Greenwood's strongest moment on the record.
I agree, and it's one of Tom York's strongest vocal moments too. He is intense and gnashing on that song,
and I love his lyrics.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. That goes into the spooky Climbing Up the Walls, which is one of my favorite tracks.
I love that track.
From this album. Once again, they're realizing where they can take a step back and finding that less can be more in terms of performance if they're willing to fill that void with some production and some atmosphere. That's what they're really perfecting here. So, Jake, did you want to jump back to Paranoid Android? I'm getting that impression.
I kind of do. So, Paranoid Android is the second song on the album. If you're gonna, it's very hard for me, just because I love this record so much. I will say that I do like OK Computer more than the Bends.
Really? Okay.
I know a lot of people won't say that.
Sure.
I will say that. Just because I feel like from an intellectual level, OK Computer tackles more subjects that I find interesting.
Sure.
From a musical level, I feel like the songs are more are darker and show more dynamic contrast, show obviously the instrumentation is just top notch, probably their highlight of their discography as far as quality instrumentation is concerned. Songwriting is just top notch throughout all of Radiohead's discography, and it clearly is here. So a lot of people, OK Computer has gone down in history as one of the best rock albums of all time. One of the best albums of the 1990s. I would say it totally deserves all of those things. I can't say enough great things about OK Computer. So that being said, it's made up of just a playlist of incredible tracks. Sure. Starting with Airbag, which is a song about, Tom was in a near fatal car accident, and so we wrote a song about it called Airbag. In an interstellar burst, I'm back to save the universe. That moment when, like, oh my God, I could have just died, but I'm alive, and I can't believe that I'm so lucky to be here. and it starts off with just this huge distorted guitar, and the song kind of builds, and then you have, a lighter guitar flutter come in, and then just, kind of distorted drum beats.
Yeah, overblown drums. I love that when those come in.
Just the natural. That's probably one of the more upbeat songs on the album.
It is.
Actually kind of transitions nice if you were expecting the bends and then you get that. You get Airbag. It's a great song. It's a great intro track. But then that goes into Paranoid Android. And they were key, and they put these little beeps at the end of Airbag, and it transitions perfectly into the acoustic noodling that begins Paranoid Android. Tom, you know a lot about this song. How would you describe this song and what it accomplishes? And it's Radiohead's, up until their most recent release, it was their longest song.
Oh, that's a good point. I never thought about that, but it is interesting because Radiohead, for being such an experimental, forward-looking band, they are able to accomplish that with relatively short track lengths. I think that what Paranoid Android accomplishes is it has this cynicism to it that had just not been present on their records up to that point. It's a very biting song, but it is able to do so at so many dynamic levels. Even when you break into the more angelic sounding kind of bridge part where the rain down from a great height, like that part, it sounds like almost religious and spiritual, and it's so gorgeous. But still, there's like it's almost like they're building you up to break you back down, because then the guitar attack just comes back in, and it is just some of the most apt, amazing guitar work that I have ever heard on that track. And it's really throughout the whole song, too. Even in the beginning, when it's a little more of a subdued groove, the guitar is just moving so nimbly that it works really well. You have all the auxiliary percussion going. It's just a masterfully crafted track, and really one that I think the reason they get away with such a long length on it is just because they go so many places with it. Like you said, it's that kind of almost like compilation within a song approach, but I think it was pretty ballsy to put it as the second track, especially after something like Airbag, because when you get to that, it's like, what is going on? So I played this album for my dad when I was in middle school. I used to play for my dad just like whatever I was listening to at the time, and I showed him OK Computer, and it was he's my dad. He's a nice guy. He'd always just kind of say, "Oh yeah, that's nice," and kind of listen, and we'd talk about what we were listening to. When I played him OK Computer and we got through Paranoid Android, he went out and bought the CD right after that, just because of hearing that song.
That's awesome.
Like, that is the power that song can have on people.
Do you remember when we saw Radiohead in 2008 in St. Louis? This was the last track they played. They played like 25 songs, played for like 2.5 hours, 2 encores, also they're kind of epilogues. This was the second encore, and it was the last track they played, and it was just incredible. Great way to end the night. One of the best Radiohead songs of all time. I think most people would say it's in their top 10 Radiohead songs. Sure. I love this track. I don't know where I'd rank it in my favorite Radiohead song rankings. Obviously love that track. And it goes from Paranoid Android into kind of a different, kind of a song that I would say really showed that they were still pushing the bounds of their songwriting. Subterranean Homesick Alien, track 3. A lot of swirling guitars. I love Tom's lyrics about I wish that they swooped down on a country lane late at night when I'm driving, and he kind of tells a story that also is reflected that like if these aliens were up in the sky looking down on us, like what would they see? They would see us like going to work every day, being uptight about everything. And then think they think that we're crazy. Why would they want to come here? And it just kind of it shows Tom evolving as a songwriter and a lyricist, because he's writing these perspectives that just make you think differently about life, about society, and that just adds to the allure and the depth of Radiohead. I think that song's absolutely beautiful. I've had some very personal dreams that involve that song that I won't get into. But then it goes into Exit Music, and you were talking about that song earlier.
Now, are you ready for me to pee in your Cheerios a little bit here?
Yeah, my Cheerios are here, ready to be yellowed.
I said we're nothing sacred here. So I do regard this album as a pure work of genius. I really do. I love it. It's not one of my more favorite Radiohead albums, and I've always struggled with it a bit, and I realize
What the hell
why.
is wrong with you?
So here's the deal. Jake, don't get a headache over this now. So the big thing is, I'll come out and say, I just think that there are a couple of weaker tracks.
Okay.
And the one of the big ones for me is track 5, Let Down. And I think that probably a lot of people would at least agree that it's not one of the highlights
I would
from
agree
the
with
album.
that.
The reason that it doesn't quite do it for me is, now, Jake, we've talked before about how I tend to connect more with the instrumentals in Radiohead. I love Tom York's voice, but I love it when the instrumentals are doing something interesting. Mm-hmm. And this song for me is one where I don't feel like they really engage me on either level. There's just kind of this clean, like, plucked guitar part that's just kind of meandering around. And then here is Tom York's vocal melodies. Da, da, da 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 da. Are you getting annoyed? Because that's how I feel when I'm listening to that song. Like, and that was only like half of the verse. Now it's not. I'm being a little dramatic. I never skip this song. It's an enjoyable enough song. But I feel like what they're doing on this song is a lesser version of what they already did on Subterranean Homesick Alien. It's got a similar aesthetic. It's got the clean, kind of delayed, twinkling guitars. But think about the melody and the lyrics to Subterranean Homesick Alien. It's so much more moving and so much more potent. Mm-hmm. And then you get to Let Down, and I feel like it's an even like 5-minute track. It's a longer track, and it just doesn't accomplish quite as much for me.
All right, so my inner Radiohead fan wants to say, yeah, man, but if you listen to it, there's Let Down and Hanging Around, and it just helps, it just helps the mood of the album, because the society is just letting you down, and the government's letting you down, man, and you're just hanging around, and the songs sound depressing because you're supposed to be depressed. And Radiohead wants you to be depressed.
If you just say enough times in that voice, I might be convinced.
All your points. I actually agree with most of your points here. One thing I would point out is the use of some sort of electronic melody here that also mimics the guitar part. The point of this song was to be densely simple. They wanted to use a lot of basic melodies. Tom's vocals are obviously much more pulled back and just basically structured, and the lyrics are even more basic on this song. They wanted to show contrast by pulling it back. So functionally, as a piece of this album experience, I totally understand why they did this song the way they did and put it on here, and I like the song, but only in the context of the album.
Sure.
I never go out of my way to listen to Let Down. I will agree with you on that. The other song that I would put on here like this, I know we're skipping ahead now, is The Tourist.
That was the other one for me.
The Tourist is actually written by Jonny Greenwood.
Yeah.
And I personally, I've just always thought that it was kind of a weak closer for such a huge album.
It is, especially coming after Lucky.
And I don't think that the lyrics are that great.
No, which Lucky is a monumental song, and the climax of Lucky is so big, like that's just where I want it to end. And then they have The Tourist, which is a longer track, and it's just kind of this slow, like dynamic low point. The tempo's pulled back, which is kind of funny considering the chorus lyrics are "Hey man, slow down."
Idiot, slow down.
I feel like that's what they're doing with this track. They're slowing it down, but to the point where it doesn't keep my interest quite as much.
Yeah.
And I mean, still, once again, when I listen to this album, I let it play through that song. I don't skip Let Down. These aren't actually huge complaints. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to point out why this is, an album that for me, I think that the highlights on this album for me are far stronger than High and Dry, than the Bends. Mm-hmm. But I think that as a full album, I find myself coming back to the Bends more because for me, it's just a much more full experience. But I think OK Computer is a much more rewarding experience because of how adventurous it is. So it's something I am pretty torn on. I think it's a brilliant record.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. I feel similarly. I would just err on the side of favoring OK Computer
sure.
over the Bends, but I mean, they're both like perfect albums,
Yeah.
or near perfect albums in my mind. And for as much as I love them and I've grown up with these records, they've just become a part of who I am, right? You know, other songs on here that we haven't spoken to yet. Track 6, Karma Police. Just the idea of Karma Police. And you know, the lyrics of Karma Police, arrest this man, his Hitler hairdo is making me feel ill. Just all of the Karma Police lyrics, and at the end it goes, for a minute there I lost myself, and then it has this expanded outro. It is just a brilliant track, and right at the center of the album, it really does ground the album out as kind of one of the thesis statements of the album.
This is what you'll get when you mess with us. Karma Police.
Another song, one of the singles, No Surprises, track 10. A very ballad-esque song.
Yeah.
A bit slower in tempo, but it really does drive the thesis, kind of the conceptual thesis of the entire record.
And I feel like that song actually does a similar thing to Let Down, but even a little bit better.
Yes, I totally agree
because
with that.
this is another song that sounds very sedated, but when you pair that with the lyrics and the lyrics just talking about this very, how you just want this uneventful middle class stereotypical
sardonic.
life. Right, absolutely. And so you take those lyrics and you put it with this droll presentation, and it actually hits the message home much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's making the point with his voice that he's so tired, unhappy, and he sings it so tired, unhappy.
Yeah,
it fits the lyrics a bit more, and I guess you could make the same argument for Let Down. I just like the music better, and I think it's more effective in
totally
No
agree.
Surprises.
I'll take a quiet life on a handshake of carbon monoxide and no surprise.
OK Computer, as I said right when we got to this record, third record in 4 years from Radiohead. Pablo Honey in 93, The Bends in 1995, OK Computer 1997, to massive critical acclaim. Every music show, every music magazine, every radio program that these guys came into contact with, they wanted interviews. They were winning all sorts of awards for this record. They were on an extensive tour. It was just so taxing. They had to travel the world and play hundreds and hundreds of shows, touring and supporting OK Computer. But at this point, they have 3 albums that have a really solid fan base, have garnered all this attention, have a number of songs that everyone wants to hear. One of those being "Creep," which they played at every show. And it just began to wear on the band. This is a band that did not understand how to handle success. They were making music for the sake of making music. They wanted to express their art through music. And and when you approach writing music and making music with that mentality, success seems kind of like a strange burden to bear.
Yeah. It's almost counterproductive to the reason you make music, but then you want to be successful with it.
Yet the paradox is if you naturally just stick to the art and the craft, and that's what you focus on, and you're really doing something special, which I would argue Radiohead does.
Yeah.
You're naturally going to be successful. So that's one barometer of how you know you're doing the right thing. And Radiohead have always seemed to understand that they know they're doing the right thing. Yet they can't handle the success. They really struggle with it. The band nearly breaks up after they finish the OK Computer tour.
Yeah.
And they go on a hiatus. And at this point, they've conquered the music world. The sales for OK Computer, it went platinum, I think, very quickly, and it sold just tons of records. So when a band reaches that level, they're able to do whatever they want to do at that point. And while they were under a 6 record deal on their record label, they still now had earned the freedom to take some time off. So
they had no deadline for their next album.
They went on hiatus, and then slowly but surely started regrouping, writing songs, and then starting to get back together.
So with not having a deadline and having a lot of freedom from their label to take some time on making their fourth LP, there's a lot of turmoil within the band, as you mentioned, Jake. They're not really sure where they want to go. The band members are arguing and disagreeing about what direction to take their sound. What should they make next? Should they experiment a bit? Ed O'Brien wanted to make some just short, snappy, guitar-based pop songs, and some of the other members did not want to do that. So they're working on their fourth LP, and with that fourth LP is where we're going to pick up in the next part of this podcast. We're going to split it up a little bit. So we're going to leave ourselves in the late 90s, and when you hear from us next, we will pick up with the early 2000s for Radiohead.
I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.
So following the Bends, Radiohead released the hit album Devil Without a Cause, featuring such singles as Ba Wida Ba and Cowboy.